CONSCRIPT is a survival horror game that borrows very heavily from Resident Evil, specifically in a lot of cases, Resident Evil 4. You've got a merchant, locked doors with emblems, pretty difficult combat, and some intense atmosphere. Where it differs from Resident Evil is that in this game, there are no monsters, there's no scientific conspiracy, there's no zombies, no zombie dogs, thank God, no men in trench coats, and no one's throwing their shades at you. No. The monster here is war itself. In CONSCRIPT, you play as Andre, a young French soldier fighting during the Great War, along with his brother, Pierre. I'm sorry for that weird pronunciation. But when Pierre goes missing, it's up to Andre to not only fulfill his role as a soldier, should the player choose to, but to also find and rescue his brother from the German military. The game's story is heartbreaking, to say the least, and often goes out of its way to remind the player of just how bleak the battle they're in is. Soldiers who tried to escape were killed via firing squad. Rats are devouring the flesh of the long-dead soldiers that either didn't have time to be buried or simply wouldn't fit in any graves that were made. And the odds were hopeless to fight back against the Germans. But even with that said, the game also goes out of its way to remind you of the human cost of war, the soldiers each individual fighting on both sides, reminding you, again, that they are human. When you kill some enemies in the game, for example, you'd find a photo of a loved one on them, or their home, or something they care about that's just keeping them going, much like Andre has a photo of his loved one on him. Moments like that, and I know this game isn't unique for doing it, but I still love to see that kind of thing portrayed. Because instead of making you feel like, yeah, they are the faceless, they are the bad enemy, when you kill someone and you see something shining on the corpse, you pick it up and it's just a child. You remember this person I just killed was a father. And stuff like that, at least for me, sticks with you. While the game isn't voiced beyond some in-game shouts, the dialogue is spot on and made me care about the few characters that I did meet and interact with, even if I didn't really get to know them all that well. Beyond that, the game has multiple endings that are contingent on you really paying attention to the details and what's going on around you, as well as going out of your way to search optional areas. Speaking of areas, the game is vast for its 12-hour runtime. Real quick aside on that, I do think this game overstays its welcome just a little bit, but I don't think it's that rough in how it's paced, but I'll get to that more in a moment. In true survival horror fashion, you will have many areas you'll traverse that are interconnected to one another, as well as areas above and below your location. It can be overwhelming at first, but here's a tip to help not make the maps feel as overwhelming as they are. The map often looks bigger than what it actually is. What looks like you'll be running from one side of the map to the other in 30 seconds will actually take you about 10. That said, not all maps are made equal. Sometimes they will take you about 30, sometimes they'll take you about 20. It depends on how often you stop or what part of the game you're in. And this is where I'm going to bring up a criticism I saw online in I want to say it was on Reddit, but honestly, it's a sentiment that is not exclusive to CONSCRIPT. Backtracking. You will be doing a lot of backtracking in this game. And for some of you, that's going to turn you off, especially in the game's 12-ish hour runtime. But for those of you who are used to that in your survival horror games, you might even look forward to that amount of backtracking. Like, oh, I found this wheel all the way down here on the bottom of the map. Now I have to lug it all the way back through a few loading screens or several loading screens just to put it on the other thing, to open the thing in the middle of the map. You'll be doing that a lot. So if that doesn't sound great for you, then, well, there's a lot of that in this game. So in short, gamer discretion advised. Visually, the game has a striking pixelated art style that harkens back to the visuals of old survival horror games back in the day. And frankly, I think this style lends itself very well to the scares that the game drums up. Most of the horror comes from the grotesque nature of some of the violence and the suffering that is going on around you. There are many times in the game where an ally will be desperately crawling up to you, missing the lower half of their body, and all you can do is either keep moving or watch them die at your feet. And by the way, if you do try to keep running past them, they will crawl and turn around and keep crawling towards you. And there's just something very disturbing about that for obvious reasons. There's another point in the game that isn't particularly scary, but definitely haunting, where I entered a building in a recently bombed town and grabbed a few items, the usual looter stuff that you do. On my way out, I could hear a baby crying behind a barricaded door. Unfortunately, the barricade couldn't be destroyed no matter how much I struck at it, so I just stood there for a moment, listening to the baby cry, and thought that either the baby was barricaded back there for their own safety, and someone didn't return or couldn't return to get them, or they were barricaded with a guardian and the guardian died back there, so the baby is essentially just left to starve to death. All I could do was just leave and continue my mission at hand. It actually kind of hurt, not gonna lie. Maybe I'm soft for this kind of stuff, but I hadn't had that feeling before from a survival horror game, or at least not in a while. I'll say not in a while. I haven't had that. That's just one of the many examples of how the game will haunt you psychologically. But if you're concerned about jump scares, don't be. There are some, but they're not intense. The only ones that genuinely got me are some of the ones you get when entering different areas. You open a door, the screen fades to black so it can load, and you're expecting the next area to load in, but instead you get a figure standing in front of you in the dark, ready to hit you. The game, once again, is tense and haunting to say the least, and its setting definitely gives the horror it portrays a very unique flair. Now, in my mind, gameplay in this game is fairly complex in the grand scheme of things. Terrain can affect your movement and your ability to dodge roll. Yes, there is a dodge roll in this game and a stamina bar in this game, so it's basically a Souls-like and a survival horror. Weapons, while plentiful overall, have different upgrades that you can give them with weapon parts that you find, like the merchant in Resident Evil 4. You upgrade them at the merchant in this game. Resources are pretty limited on soldier difficulty, that's what I played on, and enemies are very aggressive. Combat in this game feels as reliable as it feels tough, if that makes sense. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. The top-down perspective makes aiming a bit tricky, since you need to be conscious of where and how you'll be standing and all that while you're firing your weapon, since you can't fire your weapon while you're running. You need to make use of melee weapons when you need to conserve ammo, but melee weapons also have durability, so you can't just go crazy, go stupid with them. You can get different status effects applied to your health when you take certain kinds of damage. I can go on. Individually, the game is doing things that you've experienced before, but as a package, it feels airtight. You also get limited saves, which is the option I selected, but said option is separate from difficulty. So if you want to have unlimited saves and or checkpoints, then you can have them. Using unlimited saves, though, will lock you out of achieving an S+ rank at the end of the game, though, if you choose to do so. I knew this game was up my alley when it came to combat difficulty when I was about 2 hours in, low on cigarettes, that's the currency for this game, low on ammo, and was essentially in a bad spot. So what did I do? I started over. With the hindsight I had, what took me 2 hours before only took me 30 minutes, but the fact that I had to start over or felt compelled to and did not mind, I think that's praiseworthy for this game. The variety of enemy types was impressive as well. It demanded me to prioritize them or just straight up not fight at all. And some enemies are very fast. So even if I didn't want to fight, I'd still do so just to get rid of those fast melee enemies. You know my rule of thumb. I'm going to avoid combat unless I either A, am incentivized to do so, which this game does. When you kill an enemy, sometimes they'll drop ammo or something like that. Or I'll kill enemies if I know I'm going to be in an area a lot, or I'm going to be running through an area a lot. That's how I play. The movesets of some of the enemies were also pretty varied, in that if you got close, or too close I should say, they'll melee you so you're knocked back so they can shoot you. I can go on and on about how much I love how this game feels and how the combat feels, but I'm going to move on now for the sake of time. The few puzzles there aren't really all that difficult, since most of them are just find item A and bring it to the door to get item B and blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? Environmental puzzles. It's a lot of backtracking, as I mentioned earlier, and running around, so how you vibe with that in this game, or any survival horror game that does that really, is going to depend on how patient you are as a gamer. CONSCRIPT was the perfect survival horror game I needed to close out spook season, besides Silent Hill F. And I cannot recommend it enough if you are a fan of survival horror games, especially ones of the Resident Evil variety. So CONSCRIPT gets a go for it from me, and you can pick it up for $20 on PC, PS5, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, PS4, Mac OS, and Xbox Series X and S. I really should get into the habit of just saying everything, but the day I do is the day someone says, I can't play it on my fridge, therefore it's not everything. There are other editions of the game, but I didn't buy those. However, if you are interested in those, the deluxe edition is $24 and the officer edition is $27. So really not that much more than the base game, but hey, there you go. And that's it for the spook season of horror game reviews. So now I'm going back to my bi-weekly upload schedule, which I'll be real, I'm grateful for, because this was actually a lot. That said, I wouldn't mind doing it again. We'll see. DreadOut 2 was originally in this list of games that I wanted to play this month, but I kind of chickened out on that one. Again, different horror games require different amounts of courage from me, and DreadOut 1 managed to really get under my skin, so I'm not surprised I weaseled myself out of playing DreadOut 2 this time around. But now DreadOut 3 is coming, and there's a part of me that kind of wants to play that one, so I guess I'll have to play through 2 anyway. But that's a different fear for a different day. So I hope you all have enjoyed your stay. I'm TUSDarryl, and I'll catch you all later.